The truck's heater had stopped working almost an
Dad,
hour
look!
ago.
Is that someone out
Daniel
there?
Harper gripped the steering wheel with one hand and reached toward the back seat with the other. "You okay back there, buddy?" A small voice answered through chattering teeth. "I'm okay, Dad." But Noah wasn't okay. The 12-year-old was wrapped in two old blankets, curled against the window while snow hammered the highway outside. Daniel checked the fuel gauge again. Almost empty. His paycheck hadn't arrived. His rent was already late. And now, his truck was dying in the middle of a winter storm. Then Noah suddenly sat upright. "Dad." Daniel looked into the mirror. "What?" "The man." Daniel followed Noah's finger. About 50 yards ahead, near the shoulder of the road, an elderly man stood alone in the snow. No coat, no gloves, no vehicle nearby. Just a thin military jacket covered in white flakes. Cars passed him, trucks passed him. Nobody stopped. The old man looked unsteady, like he might fall at any moment. Daniel swallowed. The fuel warning light blinked. He couldn't afford another problem. Not tonight. "Dad." Noah's voice was quieter now, the kind of voice children use when they're asking for something important. Daniel slowed slightly. Behind him, a horn blasted. A pickup swerved around them. The old man remained standing in the storm, waiting, or maybe just surviving. Daniel's hands tightened around the wheel. He had exactly $23 in his wallet, a broken heater, a son depending on him, and no idea where they would find money if the truck stopped. Then Noah asked the question Daniel already knew was coming. "Are we really going to leave him there?" For 3 seconds, neither of them spoke. Snow hit the windshield. The fuel light glowed, and Daniel stared at the old veteran, growing smaller in the mirror. Then he made a decision, one that would change both of their lives. Daniel turned the wheel. The truck fishtailed slightly as Daniel pulled onto the shoulder. Snow crunched beneath the tires. For a moment, the old man didn't even seem to notice. He stood with his head lowered, shoulders trembling beneath the thin military jacket. Daniel rolled down the window. Instantly, freezing air rushed inside. "Sir?" The man looked up. His face was red from the cold. Late 70s, maybe older. White hair, gray beard, eyes that looked exhausted. "You need a ride?" The old man hesitated, almost like he wasn't sure the question was real. Then he nodded once. Daniel climbed out and helped him into the passenger seat. The moment the door closed, Noah leaned forward. "Are you okay, sir?" The man looked at him and managed a weak smile. "I've been better, son." His voice sounded rough, like he hadn't spoken much lately. Daniel pulled back onto the road. For several minutes, nobody said anything. The veteran held his shaking hands near the heater vents, even though they barely worked. Finally, Daniel asked, "Where are you headed?" The old man stared out the window. "Honestly, I don't know anymore." That answer filled the cab with silence. Noah looked confused. Daniel felt something heavier, concern. After another mile, the veteran spoke again. "My name's Walter." "Daniel." "Noah." Walter nodded. "Thank you for stopping." His voice cracked slightly. "You'd be surprised how many people stop seeing you once you get old." Daniel didn't know what to say, because lately, he'd been feeling invisible too. Late rent notices, extra shifts, bills piling up, people acting like struggling fathers somehow deserved it. The truck hit a patch of ice. Walter grabbed the dashboard. Daniel steadied the vehicle. "You got family nearby?" Daniel asked. Walter's expression changed immediately. A flash of pain, then regret. "No." The answer came too quickly, too final, as if there was a much longer story hiding behind it. No one noticed it too. Daniel could tell. Children often recognized sadness faster than adults. Outside, the storm intensified. Visibility dropped. And then something unexpected happened. Walter slowly reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded photograph. He stared at it for several seconds. His hands trembled. His eyes watered. Then he quietly whispered, "I never thought it would end like this." Neither Daniel nor Noah knew what he meant, but both of them suddenly felt the same question. How had a decorated veteran ended up alone in a snowstorm with nowhere to go? And neither of them knew the answer was far worse than they imagined. Daniel kept driving. The snow came down harder, turning the highway into a tunnel of white. Walter still held the photograph. For several miles, Nobody spoke. Then Noah finally asked the question, "Who is that?" Walter looked down at the picture. A faint smile appeared, the kind that comes from a memory instead of the present. "My son." Noah nodded. "He looks happy." Walter's smile faded. "Yeah." That was all he said. But the silence afterward said much more. Daniel glanced at him. "Do you know where he is now?" Walter folded the photograph carefully. For a moment, Daniel thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed. "Not anymore." The words landed heavily inside the truck. Noah looked toward the window. Even at 12, he understood what losing someone sounded like. A few minutes later, the fuel warning light beeped again. Daniel's stomach tightened. They were running out of options. The nearest gas station appeared ahead through the snow, a small building glowing against the darkness. Daniel pulled in. "Need to get fuel." Walter immediately reached for his pocket. "I can help." Daniel shook his head. "No, sir." The veteran looked embarrassed. "I don't have much, anyway." Daniel stepped outside before the conversation could continue. The freezing wind slapped him instantly. Inside the station, he counted his money twice. $23. That was everything. He bought $15 of gas. Nothing more. Back in the truck, Noah quietly handed him a wrapped sandwich from his backpack. The lunch Daniel had packed for him that morning. "You should eat." Daniel smiled. "You eat it." Noah looked toward Walter, then back at his father. "I'm not hungry." It was a lie. A father always knows. Walter noticed too. For several seconds, he stared at the sandwich, then at Noah. Then he looked away and wiped at one eye. Nobody mentioned it. Nobody had to. As they pulled back onto the highway, Walter finally spoke. "I spent 31 years in the army." Daniel glanced over. Walter continued. "I thought if you served people, if you did the right thing long enough." His voice drifted off. "What?" Noah asked softly. Walter stared into the storm. "You'd never end up alone." The truck fell silent again. But now, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about it, because something wasn't adding up. 31 years of service. No family nearby. No home to return to. No destination. And a photograph he couldn't stop looking at. Whatever had happened to Walter, it hadn't started with the snow. It had started long before tonight. And Daniel was beginning to realize the old veteran was carrying far more than the cold. The storm forced traffic to crawl. Daniel tightened his grip on the wheel as snow swept across the road in thick waves. Walter seemed warmer now, but exhaustion hung over him, the kind that sleep couldn't fix. After another 20 minutes, Daniel finally asked, "Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight?" Walter didn't answer right away. His eyes remained fixed on the windshield. Then he quietly said, "I was supposed to." Daniel glanced at him. "Supposed to?" Walter nodded. "My apartment." "What happened?" The veteran let out a slow breath. "They changed the locks." Noah looked up immediately. "What do you mean?" Walter rubbed his hands together. "I fell behind on rent." Daniel felt something twist inside his chest. That sounded painfully familiar. Walter continued, 2 months behind." His voice carried no anger, only defeat. "I thought I could catch up." "What about your pension?" Daniel asked. Walter gave a small laugh. Not a happy one. "Medical bills." That explained part of it, but not all of it. Daniel could feel it. There was still something missing, a larger wound hiding underneath the financial problems. The highway curved through a wooded area. Dark trees disappeared behind sheets of snow. Walter reached into his pocket again and unfolded the photograph. This time Daniel got a better look. A younger Walter stood beside a man in military fatigues. Both smiling, both proud, both looking almost identical. "His son." "You served together?" Daniel asked. Walter stared at the picture. "No." A pause. "He enlisted after me." "What happened?" The veteran swallowed. For several seconds, only the sound of the tires filled the cab. Then he quietly answered. "We stopped speaking." Noah frowned. "Why?" Walter's jaw tightened. "I wish I knew." The answer sounded incomplete. Maybe because it was. Daniel didn't push further. Some wounds don't open because someone asks. They open when they're ready. A mile later, Walter suddenly coughed. Hard. Violently. The kind that bends your whole body forward. Daniel's eyes widened. "You okay?" Walter nodded immediately. Too quickly. "I'm fine." Then another cough hit him. And another. This time Noah noticed the handkerchief Walter pressed against his mouth. The small spot of red left behind. Walter folded it before Daniel could get a better look, but not before Noah saw it. And the expression on the boy's face changed. Because he had seen blood. Walter noticed Noah staring. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then the old veteran forced a smile. Just an old man's cough. But Noah didn't look convinced. Neither did Daniel. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Inside the truck, a different kind of fear had quietly arrived. And neither of them knew how serious it really was. For the next several miles, Noah kept glancing toward Walter. The veteran acted as if nothing had happened. But every few minutes another cough escaped him. Short, sharp, painful. Daniel noticed it too. He also noticed something else. Walter's hands weren't just cold. They were trembling. Even now, even after nearly an hour inside the truck. "You sure you're okay?" Daniel asked. Walter nodded. "Just tired." The answer sounded practiced, like he'd given it many times before. The snowstorm showed no signs of letting up. Road conditions were getting worse. A highway sign appeared through the darkness. "Motel next exit." Daniel stared at it, then at the fuel gauge, then at the cash remaining in his wallet. $8. That was all. Normally, the decision would have been simple. Keep driving. Save every dollar. Figure things out tomorrow. But tonight, there was Noah, and Walter, and a storm that was becoming dangerous. Daniel took the exit. Walter looked surprised. "You don't have to do that." Daniel kept his eyes on the road. "Yeah." A pause. "I do." 10 minutes later, they pulled into a small roadside motel. The parking lot was nearly empty. Snow piled against the building. Daniel stepped into the office while Noah and Walter waited. 5 minutes later, he returned. His expression said everything. "What happened?" Noah asked. Daniel exhaled. "One room left." Walter immediately shook his head. "You two take it." "No." Daniel. "No." Walter looked uncomfortable. "I'm not asking for charity." Daniel stared at him. For the first time all night, his voice carried frustration. "This isn't charity." Walter fell silent. Daniel continued. "It's below freezing outside." Another pause. "You weren't going to make it through the night out there." The veteran looked away. Noah noticed tears gathering in the old man's eyes. Not dramatic tears. The quiet, kind people fight to hide. Finally, Walter nodded once. Inside the room, the heat felt almost unreal. 2 small beds, a television that barely worked, old carpet, nothing special, yet somehow it felt safe. For the first time that day, Noah relaxed. Walter sat heavily on one of the beds, as if his body had finally stopped pretending to be stronger than it was. Then his eyes drifted toward the family photograph again. His fingers touched the edge of it, gently, carefully, like it was one of the few things he had left. And that's when Noah noticed something written on the back. A name, an address, and a date from nearly 8 years ago. The boy stared at it, because suddenly a question entered his mind. What if Walter's son wasn't impossible to find? Noah tried not to stare. Walter had set the photograph beside him while he removed his boots. For only a second, the back of the picture was visible, but that was enough. A name, Michael Carter, an address, and a date, 8 years old. Then Walter picked it up again and slipped it back into his pocket. The moment passed, but Noah couldn't stop thinking about it. Daniel returned from the vending machine carrying 2 bottles of water and a package of crackers. Not much, just what the last few dollars could buy. 5-star dinner, he joked. Noah smiled weakly. Walter managed a small laugh. For a few minutes, things felt normal. Then Walter started coughing again, harder this time. The sound filled the room. Daniel immediately stood. "That's not a cold." "I'm fine." "You keep saying that." Walter looked down. His shoulders sagged. The fight seemed to leave him all at once. Finally, he whispered, "Doctors found something last year." The room became still. "What kind of something?" Daniel asked. Walter hesitated. The silence stretched. Then he answered, "Lung disease." Noah lowered his eyes. Daniel sat on the edge of the other bed. "Are you getting treatment?" Walter gave a tired smile. "I was." The single word carried an uncomfortable truth. Past tense. Daniel didn't need an explanation. Medical bills. missed appointments, money running out. He'd seen versions of that story before. Walter stared at the floor. You spend your whole life thinking you're strong. A pause. Then one day, your body decides otherwise. Nobody spoke. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Inside, the room felt smaller, heavier. After a while, Walter lay down and closed his eyes. Within minutes, exhaustion pulled him into sleep. Noah waited until the veteran's breathing settled. Then he quietly turned toward his father. Dad. Daniel looked up. What is it? I saw the picture. Daniel frowned. What picture? The one with his son. Noah lowered his voice further. There was a name and an address on the back. Daniel stared at him. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Noah asked the question that had been growing inside him all evening. What if his son doesn't know what's happened to him? Daniel looked toward the sleeping veteran. The old man's face seemed older now, more fragile, like the storm had stripped away the last of his strength. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Because he had been wondering something similar, and deep down, he had a feeling the story Walter told wasn't the whole story. Not even close. Daniel didn't answer right away. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the sleeping veteran. Walter's breathing was uneven. Every so often, a faint cough escaped him, even in his sleep. The room's heater hummed quietly. Outside, snow continued to fall. Finally, Daniel spoke. Families are complicated, buddy. Noah frowned. That doesn't answer the question. Daniel almost smiled. Noah had always been like that. Straight to the point. No, Daniel admitted. It doesn't. The boy looked toward Walter. He seems lonely. Daniel followed his gaze. Lonely wasn't the right word. Lonely sounded temporary. What he saw in Walter looked older than that, like years of carrying disappointment alone. Noah hesitated, then asked something unexpected. Do you think Grandpa would have helped us? The question hit Daniel harder than he expected. For a moment, memories returned. A small house, a garage filled with tools, his father teaching him how to change a tire, the smell of coffee before sunrise, then the hospital, the machines, the goodbye he never felt ready for. Daniel swallowed. Yeah, Noah nodded slowly. I think so too. Silence settled between them. Then the boy looked back at Walter. Maybe that's why we stopped. Daniel stared at his son. What do you mean? Noah shrugged. Maybe because somebody would have stopped for Grandpa. Daniel looked away. Because part of him believed that. Part of him wanted to. Hours passed. The storm weakened. The motel room darkened as night deepened. Around 2 in the morning, Daniel woke to a strange sound. At first, he couldn't place it. Then he realized. Walter was talking, not awake, dreaming. The veteran shifted restlessly beneath the blanket. His voice was weak, broken. No, please. Daniel sat up. Walter's face tightened with pain. Then another sentence escaped him, one that made Daniel freeze. Michael, don't leave angry. The room became silent again. Walter's breathing slowed, but Daniel remained awake, staring into the darkness, because those 5 words revealed something important. Whatever happened between Walter and his son, it wasn't a simple disagreement. It was the kind of wound people carried for years, the kind that followed them into their dreams. And as Daniel lay back down, he couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, another man might be carrying the exact same pain, without knowing his father was sleeping in a roadside motel, after nearly freezing in the snow.
Daniel barely slept after that. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Walter's voice again. Michael, don't leave angry. By morning, the storm had passed. Gray sunlight filtered through the motel curtains. Noah was already awake. Walter wasn't. The veteran sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window. His shoulders looked stiff, older somehow, as if the night had taken something from him. Morning, Daniel said. Walter nodded. Morning. His voice sounded tired. Noah climbed off the bed. You sleep okay? A faint smile crossed Walter's face. Better than I expected. The 3 of them shared crackers and water for breakfast. Not much, but nobody complained. Around 8 o'clock, Daniel stepped outside to inspect the truck. The cold hit immediately. He opened the hood, stared at the engine, then sighed. A hose had cracked. Not completely, but enough to be a problem. Exactly the kind of problem he couldn't afford. A mechanic's garage sat across the road. Daniel walked over. 10 minutes later, he returned looking frustrated. Noah noticed first. How bad? Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. Repairs around $200. The number hung in the air. 200 might as well have been 2,000. They didn't have it. Walter quietly lowered his eyes. This is my fault. Daniel immediately shook his head. No, if I hadn't gotten in your truck. This isn't your fault. Walter didn't look convinced. Neither did Daniel, if he was being honest. Life had been pushing him downhill for months. This was simply another shove. Then something unexpected happened. Walter slowly reached into his pocket. He removed a worn leather wallet, opened it, counted several folded bills. Not many, maybe $70. He held them out. Take it. Daniel stared at the money. No, take it. I'm not doing that. Walter's jaw tightened. You paid for the room. Daniel pushed the bills back toward him. And you need that money. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Walter quietly said, I don't need it as much as you think. The sentence felt strange, almost final. Daniel noticed it. So did Noah. And suddenly the boy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Because for the first time, it sounded like Walter had stopped planning for the future, as if he didn't expect one. And before anyone could respond, a pickup truck pulled into the motel parking lot. A man stepped out, looked toward them, then froze. His eyes locked onto Walter. The color drained from his face, and Walter looked just as shocked.
For several seconds, nobody moved. The man standing beside the pickup looked to be in his early 40s. Broad shoulders, work boots, weathered face. The kind of face shaped by long days and hard years. His eyes remained fixed on Walter. Walter stared back. Daniel looked between them. Something passed through the veteran's expression. Shock, hope, fear, all at once. The man took a slow step forward, then another. No way. His voice barely carried across the parking lot. Walter's hands trembled. Daniel suddenly understood. Before either man spoke another word, before anyone explained, he knew. The photograph, the name, the dreams, the years of silence. Michael, Walter whispered. The man froze. His throat moved as he swallowed. Then he nodded once. Walter looked like the air had been knocked from his lungs. For 8 years, he had carried a photograph. And now, the man in it was standing 20 feet away. Noah stared in disbelief. Daniel couldn't believe it either. Not because it felt impossible, but because real life sometimes creates moments nobody would believe if they were written down. Michael looked older than the photograph. More tired, more guarded. His eyes drifted toward the motel, then back to Walter. What are you doing here? The question wasn't angry, but it wasn't warm either. Walter opened his mouth. Nothing came out. 8 years of silence had apparently stolen the words. Finally, he managed. I could ask you the same thing. Michael looked away. I work nearby. Another silence. Awkward, painful, heavy. Noah shifted nervously beside his father. Neither of them knew whether to stay or leave. Then Michael noticed Daniel. And you are? Daniel. Michael nodded. His gaze moved to Noah, then back to Walter. Friends? Walter gave a sad smile. They stopped when nobody else did. Something flickered across Michael's face. Guilt, perhaps, or confusion. It was impossible to tell. The wind blew snow across the parking lot. Nobody spoke. Then Michael quietly asked the question that changed everything. Where were you headed yesterday? Walter lowered his eyes. The answer came so softly that Daniel almost missed it. Nowhere. Michael's expression hardened instantly, not with anger, with realization. A realization that seemed to hit him all at once. His father hadn't been traveling, hadn't been visiting, hadn't been passing through. He had been stranded, alone, in a snowstorm, with nowhere to go. And judging by the look on Michael's face, he had never imagined things had gotten that bad. Michael stood motionless. The wind pushed loose snow across the parking lot, but he seemed not to notice. His eyes never left his father. Nowhere, he repeated. Walter looked down. For a moment, he appeared more ashamed than cold. My apartment's gone. Michael blinked. What do you mean, gone? I lost it. The younger man's face tightened. When? A few weeks ago. A few weeks? His voice rose slightly. You've been homeless for weeks? Walter didn't answer. That was answer enough. Michael took a step back. Daniel could almost see the emotions colliding inside him. Shock, confusion, guilt, anger, not necessarily at Walter, maybe at himself. Why didn't you call me? Michael asked. Walter gave a tired laugh. You changed your number. Michael opened his mouth, then stopped. Because that part was true. Years ago, after their final argument, he had changed jobs, moved cities, and cut off nearly every connection, including the one person standing in front of him. The silence stretched. Noah looked at Daniel. Neither knew what to say. Then Michael asked the question that had clearly haunted him for years. Why didn't you come find me? Walter's eyes closed briefly, as if he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times and still wasn't ready. When a son tells his father he never wants to see him again, his voice cracked. You tried to respect it. Michael stared at him. No, the word came out immediately, firmly. No, that's not what happened. Walter looked up. For the first time, real tension entered the conversation. Michael's jaw tightened. I said I was done arguing. A pause. I never said I wanted you gone forever. The veteran looked genuinely stunned. Daniel noticed it. So did Noah, because suddenly both men appeared confused, like they had spent 8 years remembering the same day differently. Michael rubbed a hand across his face. You never called. Walter laughed bitterly. You never called either. Neither man had an answer for that. The truth sat between them, painfully simple. Two stubborn men, two wounded men, each waiting for the other to make the first move. And 8 years had disappeared because of it. Then Walter started coughing again, violently. The attack bent him forward. Michael instantly moved toward him, without thinking, without hesitation, a son's reflex. Walter pressed a hand against his mouth. When he pulled it away, a small spot of blood stained his palm. Michael saw it, and the color drained from his face. What's wrong with you? Walter didn't answer, but this time, he couldn't hide it. And Michael suddenly realized there was much more he didn't know. Michael grabbed his father's arm. What's wrong with you? Walter quickly closed his hand. It's nothing. Don't do that. The words came out sharper than intended. Years of distance vanished for a second, not because they had reconciled, because fear had replaced anger. Walter looked away. Michael turned toward Daniel. How long has this been happening? Daniel hesitated. Since we picked him up yesterday. Michael stared at his father. Yesterday? Walter remained silent. The younger man shook his head slowly, as if every answer created 3 new questions. Then Noah quietly spoke. He was coughing before that too. Walter gave the boy a tired look. You weren't supposed to notice. Noah shrugged. I noticed stuff. For the first time that morning, a faint smile touched Michael's face. It disappeared almost immediately. What did the doctors say? Walter rubbed his forehead. The fight seemed gone now. No more hiding. No more excuses. Lung disease. Michael's eyes narrowed. How bad? Walter didn't answer. That frightened him more than any words could have. How bad? He repeated. The veteran stared at the ground. Bad enough. The parking lot became silent. A truck passed on the highway. Somewhere nearby, a snowplow rumbled through an intersection. Ordinary sounds. An ordinary morning. Yet everything felt different. Michael finally exhaled. When was your last appointment? Walter said nothing. Michael already knew. You stopped going. Still no response. The younger man closed his eyes. Not in anger, in disappointment. The kind people feel when they realize someone they love has been suffering alone. Then something unexpected happened. Michael reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and made a call. Hey, Rick. A pause. I need a favor. Walter frowned. Michael. His son ignored him. Another pause. Yeah. Today. More listening. Then Michael nodded. Thank you. He ended the call. What was that? Walter asked. A doctor. The veteran's expression changed immediately. No. Yes. I'm not asking. I don't care. The words surprised everyone, even Michael. He softened his tone. I don't care if you're asking. Walter looked away. For a moment, his eyes seemed wet. Because after 8 years of silence, his son was acting like his son again. But before anyone could say more, Michael's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and the expression on his face changed. Not fear, not sadness, something closer to dread. Because the message he had just received was about the argument that ended everything 8 years ago, and it revealed a truth neither man had ever known. Michael stared at the screen. For several seconds, he didn't move. Daniel noticed immediately. So, what's wrong?" Michael didn't answer. His eyes remained locked on the message. Then he slowly sat down on the edge of a snow-covered concrete barrier. Walter frowned. "Michael?" The younger man finally looked up. His face had gone pale. "I don't understand. What is it?" Walter asked. Michael swallowed hard. "It's Rick. The doctor." Michael nodded. "But that's not why he texted." The parking lot grew quiet. Even Noah sensed something important was coming. Michael looked at his father, then away again, as if he wasn't sure whether to continue. Finally, he spoke. "Do you remember the day we stopped talking?" Walter's shoulders stiffened immediately. Of course he remembered. "Some days never leave you." "Yes." Michael stared at the snow. "I always thought you made a choice." Walter frowned. "What choice?" Michael laughed bitterly. "The sound held years of hurt. The choice not to come." The veteran looked confused. "Come where?" Michael's eyes widened. For the first time, genuine shock appeared on both faces. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Something wasn't right. Michael slowly stood. "My son." Walter blinked. "What?" "My son." A pause. "My boy was in the hospital." The world seemed to stop. Walter stared at him. Noah looked from one man to the other. Michael continued. "He was 6. His voice trembled now. "Emergency surgery." Walter's face had gone completely blank. "I never knew that." Michael froze. "What?" "I never knew." The younger man shook his head. "That's impossible." "No." Walter's voice cracked. "It's not." The two men stood staring at each other. 8 years of certainty suddenly collapsing. Michael rubbed both hands across his face. "I called you. I never got a call. I left messages. I never got them." Neither man spoke. Then Michael whispered, "I thought you ignored us." Walter looked like he couldn't breathe. "Michael." The younger man wasn't listening anymore. Memories were rearranging themselves in real time. Painful memories. The kind that shape entire lives. He slowly pulled out his phone, opened an old photo, then handed it to Walter, a little boy in a hospital bed, smiling weakly, holding a stuffed dog. Walter stared at the picture. His hands began shaking, because he had never seen it before, never even known it existed. And suddenly, both men realized the same terrifying possibility. The argument that destroyed their relationship might have been built on a misunderstanding neither of them created. Walter stared at the photo for so long that nobody spoke. The little boy looked so much like Michael had at that age that it hurt. A grandson. His grandson. A child he had never met. A child he had never known was fighting for his life. Walter's hand trembled. "When was this taken?" Michael swallowed. "The day after surgery." Walter closed his eyes. For a moment, the parking lot disappeared. The snow disappeared. Everything disappeared except one terrible realization. 8 years ago, while Michael sat beside a hospital bed, believing his father didn't care, Walter had no idea any of it was happening. "You really never knew?" Michael asked quietly. Walter looked up. The pain in his face was impossible to fake. "No." Michael stared at him, searching for a lie, a hesitation, anything. But he found nothing. Because there was nothing to find, the veteran slowly handed the phone back. "I'm sorry." Michael looked away. "Stop apologizing. I missed his whole life." Walter's voice broke. "Birthdays, school, everything." The younger man's jaw tightened. "You think I don't know that?" The words came out harder than he intended. Immediately, regret crossed his face. Neither man was angry. Not really. They were grieving. Grieving years that could never be returned. Noah stood quietly beside Daniel. The boy's eyes never left them. 8 years, Noah whispered. Daniel nodded. 8 years. Gone. Not because of hatred. Not because of cruelty. Because of assumptions. Because neither man knew the truth. Michael took a deep breath. Then another. Finally, he asked, "Do you remember your old landlord?" Walter frowned. "Mr. Grayson?" Michael nodded slowly. The name seemed familiar to Daniel. Michael looked toward the highway. "He died last year." Walter said nothing. Then, Michael continued. "My messages went through his landline." The veteran's eyes narrowed. "What?" "When I called," he answered. A long pause. "I thought he was helping." Walter's expression changed. Slowly, dangerously, because suddenly another memory surfaced. "Mr. Grayson constantly complaining about phone calls, about disturbances, about family drama. The veteran's stomach dropped. No, Michael nodded. I think he never gave you the messages. The realization landed like a hammer. Walter sat down heavily on the nearest bench. For years, he had blamed himself. Michael had blamed him, too. And now, there was a chance. Neither of them had chosen the separation at all. Then Walter lowered his head into his hands. Not because he was angry, because he was thinking about a little boy in a hospital bed, waiting for a grandfather who never knew he was needed. And nothing in the world could give those years back. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Snow slid from the motel roof in heavy clumps. A plow rumbled somewhere in the distance. Life kept moving, but for Walter and Michael, time seemed frozen. Finally, Walter lifted his head. What's his name? Michael blinked. For a second, he didn't understand. Then he realized. The boy, his son, the grandson Walter had never met. Ben. Walter repeated it softly. Ben, like he was testing the sound, trying to make 8 missing years fit inside a single word. How old is he now? 14. Walter nodded slowly. 14. Old enough to drive a lawnmower. Old enough to start high school soon. Old enough to have a whole personality. Favorite foods. Favorite movies. Friends. Dreams. An entire life. And Walter knew none of it. The realization hurt more than he expected. Michael seemed to sense it. He likes fishing. Walter looked up immediately. Michael gave a faint smile. He hates math. A pause. And he talks too much. For the first time all morning, Walter laughed. A genuine laugh. Brief, but real. Noah smiled too. The tension eased for a moment. Then Walter began coughing again. Hard. Much harder than before. The laughter vanished instantly. He bent forward, gripping the bench. Michael was beside him immediately. Dad. Walter couldn't answer. Another cough tore through him, then another. When it finally stopped, he looked exhausted. Older, much older. Michael stared at him, fear now replacing every other emotion. We're going to that doctor. Walter shook his head. No. Yes. It's expensive. I didn't ask. The veteran looked away. Daniel understood exactly what was happening. Some fathers spent their entire lives protecting others. Accepting help felt harder than suffering. Michael crouched in front of him. His voice dropped. Soft. Controlled. Dad. Walter slowly met his eyes. You don't get to disappear now. The words hit everyone. Even Michael looked surprised. He had said them aloud. But once spoken, they couldn't be taken back. You don't get to show up after 8 years. His voice cracked. And leave again. Walter's eyes filled. The younger man looked away quickly, embarrassed by his own emotions. Then his phone buzzed. Another message. He checked it, read it twice, then looked at Walter. The doctor can see you today. The veteran immediately started to protest, but Michael cut him off. No excuses. Walter glanced toward Daniel and Noah, almost asking for support. Neither gave it, because both knew Michael was right. And deep down, Walter knew it too. What none of them knew was that the doctor's appointment would reveal something far more serious than anyone expected. An hour later, they were sitting in a small medical office on the edge of town. The waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Walter looked uncomfortable, not physically, emotionally, as if being cared for felt unfamiliar. Michael sat beside him. Daniel and Noah waited across from them. Every few minutes, Michael glanced toward his father, making sure he was still there, still breathing, still real. 8 years of distance had turned even ordinary moments into something fragile. Finally, a nurse's assistant opened the door, a young man in blue scrubs. Walter. Carter. Walter stood slowly. Michael stood too. I'm coming. The assistant nodded. That's fine. The examination took nearly an hour. Daniel and Noah remained in the waiting room. Neither spoke much. Something about hospitals always made people quieter. Eventually, the door opened again. Walter emerged first. Michael followed, and the expression on his face immediately worried Daniel. Not panic, not shock. Just the look of someone carrying news he didn't want to repeat. They moved into a private consultation room. The doctor, Rick, sat across from them. Middle-aged, calm, professional, but serious. very serious. He folded his hands. Walter, I'm going to be honest. The veteran nodded. I appreciate that. Rick looked down at the chart, then back up. Your condition has progressed. The room grew still. Walter didn't react, almost as if he had expected it. Michael did. His jaw tightened immediately. How much? Rick chose his words carefully. A significant amount. Nobody spoke. Rick continued. You should have been receiving regular treatment. Walter looked away. The silence answered the question. The doctor sighed. Right now, biggest concern isn't just the disease. Michael frowned. What is it, then? Rick looked directly at Walter. Malnutrition. Daniel blinked. Noah looked confused. Walter lowered his eyes. The doctor continued. Weight loss, exhaustion, exposure to extreme cold. A pause. Your body is running on almost nothing. Michael stared at his father. The realization hit hard. This wasn't just illness. This was survival. Weeks of skipped meals, missed medications, sleeping wherever he could. Walter remained silent, ashamed. Then Rick said something that changed the atmosphere instantly. If Daniel hadn't stopped yesterday, he paused, choosing his words carefully. There's a very real chance you wouldn't have made it through the night. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the clock on the wall suddenly seemed loud. Walter looked at Daniel. Daniel looked away, because hearing it out loud felt different, more real, more frightening. And for the first time since the storm began, everyone in the room understood how close they had come to losing him. The consultation room remained silent. Walter stared at the floor. Michael sat motionless beside him. Noah looked from face to face, trying to process what the doctor had said. You wouldn't have made it through the night. The sentence seemed to linger in the air. Rick eventually cleared his throat. There are treatment options. Michael immediately leaned forward. Then we'll do them. Walter opened his mouth. Michael didn't even let him start. We'll do them. The veteran sighed. Dad. The word stopped Walter, not because it was loud, because it had been missing for 8 years. Michael rubbed his face. I already lost 8 years. His voice was rough. I'm not losing the rest. Walter looked away. The emotion in the room had become difficult to hide. Rick quietly slid a folder across the desk. Inside were treatment plans, appointments, medication schedules, and estimated costs. Michael opened it. His expression changed almost immediately. Daniel saw it. Money. The numbers weren't small, not even close. Michael stared at the page for several seconds, then closed the folder. We'll figure it out. Walter noticed the hesitation, the tiny pause. A father notices those things. How bad? He asked. Michael shook his head. It doesn't matter. How bad? Rick answered before Michael could. Tens of thousands over time. The room went quiet again. Walter leaned back in his chair, defeated. Daniel felt his stomach sink. Michael worked construction. The truck outside wasn't new. His boots were worn. This wasn't a man sitting on a fortune. Walter knew it too. No. Michael turned toward him. No, what? No treatment. The younger man's eyes narrowed immediately. We are not doing this. I won't bankrupt you. Michael laughed. A short, frustrated laugh. You think that's the problem? Walter didn't answer, because part of him did. Michael stood up and paced toward the window. Outside, snow melted from parked cars under weak sunlight. Finally, he spoke. You know what the real problem is? Nobody answered. Michael looked directly at his father. The real problem is that I spent 8 years thinking you didn't care. His voice cracked. And now I find out you were alone. Walter lowered his eyes. Michael continued. Don't tell me what my family is worth. The word family hit harder than anything else. Walter looked stunned. Daniel noticed tears forming in the veteran's eyes. Then Michael's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. A call from work. Normally, he would have answered immediately. Today he hesitated, because deep down he already knew. The next problem had arrived, and it was about to make an already impossible situation even worse. Michael stood still, phone vibrating in his hand. The room felt too small, suddenly, too quiet. He finally answered. Yeah. A pause. His face tightened. What do you mean the job's been delayed? Walter watched him closely. Daniel did too. Michael turned slightly away from the desk. His voice lowered. I told you I'm at a doctor's office. Another pause. His jaw clenched. No, I didn't know the shipment was today. Silence. Then his expression shifted. That familiar look of a man trying to hold everything together at once. I'll be there as soon as I can. He ended the call, but didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at the floor. Walter spoke softly. Work? Michael nodded once. Job site. Daniel already understood. This wasn't a flexible job. This was day-to-day survival. No work meant no pay. No pay meant nothing. Walter slowly looked down. I'm sorry. Michael spun around instantly. Stop saying that. His voice wasn't angry now. It was exhausted. Every time you say that, it sounds like you're preparing to leave again. Walter froze. The words landed deep. Rick cleared his throat carefully. I understand this is a difficult moment, but we need a plan. Michael rubbed his forehead. A plan? He laughed under his breath. Right. He looked at Walter, then at Daniel, then Noah, and something inside him shifted. Not anger. Decision. I'll take him with me. Walter frowned immediately. What? Michael nodded toward the doctor. He can start monitoring you locally. Rick hesitated. It's possible, but he needs rest and proper care. Michael cut him off. He'll get it. Walter tried to stand. I can manage on my own. Michael turned sharply. Stop lying. The room went silent. Even Walter stopped moving. Michael stepped closer. His voice dropped. You weren't managing. A pause. You were dying. Walter's expression broke slightly at that word. Michael softened just a fraction. I'm not letting that happen again. Daniel watched the exchange carefully. There was something shifting here. Not just medical urgency, but emotional correction. Years of absence, trying to repair themselves in hours. Rick spoke again. Travel could be difficult for him in this condition. Michael didn't hesitate. Then we go slow. Walter looked at him. Really looked. As if seeing the man his son had become for the first time. Stubborn, responsible, worn down by life, but still here, still choosing him. And Walter realized something quietly. Michael wasn't just angry anymore. He was committed. But before anything could be decided, Rick's expression changed slightly. He looked down at Walter's file again, then spoke carefully. There's something else you should know. The room tightened instantly. Michael narrowed his eyes. What now? Rick hesitated. This wasn't fully in your previous reports. Walter slowly looked up. For the first time all day, fear crossed his face. Because whatever was coming next wasn't just medical. It was something that could change everything again. Rick closed the file slowly. That small movement alone made the room feel heavier. Michael noticed immediately. What are you not saying? The doctor looked at Walter first, then back at Michael. There are signs we need to investigate further. Walter's throat moved as he swallowed. Investigate what? Rick didn't answer right away. Instead, he adjusted his glasses. Possible secondary complications. Daniel frowned from the corner. Noah stayed completely still. Michael stepped closer to the desk. Speak plainly. Rick exhaled. There may be additional damage beyond the lungs. Silence. Walter blinked slowly. What kind of damage? Rick pointed gently at the chart. Weight loss has been extreme. Oxygen levels have been unstable for longer than expected. He paused. And there are irregularities in your recent scans that weren't addressed properly before. Michael's expression hardened. So what does that mean? Rick met his eyes. It means we need full testing before we can say anything for certain. Walter leaned back, almost relieved. Almost. But Rick wasn't finished. There is a concern about late-stage progression. The room froze again. Michael's jaw tightened. Say it. Rick hesitated, then finally spoke. It could be advanced disease. Walter closed his eyes. No dramatic reaction, just a long, quiet acceptance, like part of him had already known. Michael shook his head. No. Walter opened his eyes. Michael, no. His son turned away sharply. Don't start accepting things before we even know. Walter's voice was softer now. I've been feeling it. Michael spun back. Feeling what? Walter hesitated, then answered honestly. That I'm running out of time. Silence hit the room harder than before. Daniel looked down. Noah's fingers tightened around his sleeves. Rick spoke gently. We can still confirm. Nothing is final yet. but nobody really heard him. Because Michael had gone completely still, the words running out of time had landed somewhere deep, somewhere irreversible. He stepped closer to his father, not angry now, afraid. "Why didn't you tell me any of this earlier?" Walter gave a weak smile. "Because I didn't want to be another problem you had to fix." That broke something in Michael's expression. His voice lowered. "You're not a problem." Walter looked at him softly. "Then don't treat me like one." The words hung there, heavy, honest, unfair, true. Michael looked away. For the first time since finding him, he had no answer. And in that silence, Rick quietly closed the file again. Because whatever came next, it was no longer just medicine, it was time, and they were running out of it faster than anyone wanted to admit. No one spoke for a long moment after Rick closed the file. The sound of paper against paper felt louder than it should have. Walter slowly stood up from the chair. His legs trembled slightly. Michael noticed immediately. "Sit down." "I'm fine." "Sit down." Walter hesitated, then obeyed. Not because he agreed, because he was tired of fighting. Rick cleared his throat gently. "I recommend starting treatment immediately if we proceed." Michael nodded. "Then we proceed." Walter shook his head. "No." Michael's eyes flashed. "Not again." Walter looked at him calmly. "This time I get to decide." The words hit differently, not as resistance, but as exhaustion. Michael lowered his voice. "What are you deciding?" Walter looked toward the window. Outside, sunlight reflected off melting snow. "I've spent my whole life being moved from one thing to another." A pause. Army, assignments, duty, expectations. He looked back at his son. Then pain, silence. Daniel felt Noah shift beside him. Walter continued. "I don't want my last chapter to be people rushing me from room to room." Michael stepped closer. "That's not what this is." Walter nodded slowly. "It feels like it." That sentence stayed in the air too long. Rick spoke carefully. "We're not talking about end-of-life decisions yet." Walter gave a small, tired smile. "Doctor, and in this body longer than you've been practicing." Rick didn't respond. Michael rubbed his face. "You don't get to just give up." Walter looked at him softly. "I'm not giving up." A pause. "I'm accepting." Michael's voice cracked slightly. "Accepting what?" Walter didn't answer immediately. Then he said it. "That I may not have enough time to fix what I broke." Silence again. He turned toward Michael fully. "And I don't want to spend whatever time I have left being a burden." That word landed hard. Burden. Michael shook his head quickly. "You were never." But Walter interrupted. "I was. Quiet. Certain. I just didn't know it then." Noah looked up at Daniel. Daniel didn't look back, because he understood something in that moment. Walter wasn't just talking about illness. He was talking about dignity, control, fear of being remembered only as something that needed saving. Michael stepped back slightly. His voice dropped. "So what? You just disappear again?" Walter's eyes softened. "No." A pause. "I stay, but on my terms." The room went silent. Even Rick seemed unsure how to respond. Then Walter looked at Michael one last time. "I came back into your life by accident." A faint breath. "Don't let me leave it the same way." Michael didn't respond, because for the first time, he realized the fight wasn't about treatment anymore. It was about how much control love was allowed to have. And neither of them had an easy answer. Michael stood frozen. Walter's words weren't loud, but they carried weight that filled the entire room. "Don't let me leave it the same way." That sentence kept echoing. Rick quietly gathered the papers. "I'll give you all some time." He stepped out, closing the door behind him. Click. Silence again. Different silence this time. Heavier, more personal. Daniel slowly stood from his chair. Noah followed. They didn't leave immediately. They just moved toward the corner, giving father and son space. Michael finally spoke. "You think I don't understand control?" Walter looked up. Michael's voice was shaking slightly now. "I've been controlling everything for 8 years. Work, money, survive raising a kid alone." Walter listened. Quiet. Michael stepped closer. "And you think I want to control you?" His voice cracked. "I just found you again." Walter lowered his eyes. "I know." Michael shook his head. "No, you don't." A breath. "I walked out of that hospital room thinking you didn't care if we lived or died." Walter flinched slightly. Michael continued. That stayed with me. Silence. Then softer. Every decision I made after that came from that place. Walter swallowed hard. I never knew. I know. Michael's voice softened too, but it still shaped everything. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Daniel glanced at Noah. The boy was watching closely, learning things no child should have to learn about adults. Michael ran a hand through his hair. I'm not asking you to be a burden. I'm asking you to be my father again. Walter's eyes filled slightly, not dramatically, just enough to show how much that sentence mattered. I don't know how to do that anymore. Michael nodded slowly. Then we figure it out. A long silence followed, not uncomfortable this time, just real. Walter finally spoke. I don't want you to watch me get worse. Michael answered immediately. I already watched you disappear once. I'm not doing it again. That landed. Walter looked down. His hands trembled slightly. For the first time, he didn't argue, didn't resist, just listen. Michael stepped closer and lowered his voice. I don't care if you need treatment or not. I care if you're alive. Walter closed his eyes. That broke him a little, because it wasn't logic. It was love. Unfiltered. Messy. When he opened his eyes again, something had shifted. Not agreement, but something closer to trust. I'm tired, Walter whispered. Michael nodded. I know. A long pause. Then Walter added quietly, but I'm not ready to leave. Michael's expression softened instantly. Then we don't talk about leaving. For the first time, the tension didn't feel like it was breaking them apart. It felt like it was rebuilding something. Carefully, outside the room, Daniel exhaled quietly. Noah whispered, do you think they'll be okay? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Then he said softly, I think they're finally starting. Inside the room, father and son stayed facing each other. Not fixed, but no longer lost. And for now, that was enough. The quiet didn't last long. Michael's phone buzzed again. Once, twice. He looked at it, expecting work. But his expression changed instantly. Not frustration this time. Concern. Walter noticed. What now? Michael didn't answer immediately. He stepped away slightly, reading the screen again. Daniel watched carefully. Noah leaned in just a little. Michael finally spoke. It's my neighbor. Walter frowned. Neighbor? Michael nodded. She's been watching Ben while I'm here. Walter's expression tightened immediately. Is something wrong? Michael hesitated, then nodded slowly. She says he won't eat. Silence dropped again. Different kind of silence. Urgent. Michael was already moving. I need to go. Walter stood too fast this time. Take me with you. Michael shook his head immediately. No, I'm his grandfather. Not in that condition. Walter's voice rose slightly. I can still see him. Michael stopped. They stared at each other. Years of distance again pressing against seconds of urgency. Daniel stepped forward. Maybe it's better if you both go. Michael turned toward him. No, he needs rest. Walter shook his head firmly. I need to see my grandson. That word hit differently. Michael hesitated. For the first time, he didn't have a quick answer. Rick opened the door at that moment, returning with a small file in his hand. He looked between them. What's happening? Michael explained quickly. Ben, something wrong at home. Rick nodded thoughtfully. Stress response is common in children during family disruption. Walter looked alarmed. I'm not a disruption. Rick softened his tone. I didn't mean you personally, but the damage was already emotional. Michael rubbed his face. I'll go check it out. Walter stepped forward again. I'm coming. Michael turned sharply. Dad. Michael. The tone changed everything. Not stubborn. Not weak. Just a grandfather asking for permission to exist in his own family. Silence. Long. Heavy. Finally, Michael exhaled. Fine. A pause. But you do exactly what I say. Walter nodded immediately. No argument. No pride. Just agreement. Daniel stepped toward Noah. We'll stay here. Michael looked at Daniel. Thank you. Noah hesitated, then asked quietly, can I meet him someday? Michael paused, looked at Walter, then nodded. Yeah, a simple word, but it carried something bigger than permission. It carried possibility. Within minutes, they were outside the motel. The cold air hit again, but it felt different now. Less like survival, more like transition. Walter sat carefully in the passenger seat. Michael started the engine, but before pulling out, he glanced at his father. You ready? Walter looked forward. Not at the road, not at the past, at what was ahead. I don't know, he said honestly. A pause. But I want to try. And for the first time in 8 years, that was enough to move forward. The truck rolled out of the parking lot, leaving behind snow, silence, and everything that had nearly ended them, and heading toward a boy who didn't yet know his grandfather was coming. The drive felt longer than it should have. Michael kept both hands on the wheel, eyes locked on the road. Walter sat quietly beside him. For once, there was no tension between them, only caution, and something fragile that almost felt like hope. After a few minutes, Walter finally spoke. What's he like, really? Michael didn't answer immediately. He exhaled slowly. Stubborn. Walter gave a faint smile. That sounds familiar. Michael glanced at him briefly. Yeah. A pause. Then softer. He's smart. Too smart for his own good. Walter nodded. Good. Another silence. Then Michael added, but he's been quiet this week. Walter's expression changed immediately. Quiet? How? Michael tightened his grip on the wheel. Not like himself. Walter looked out the window. The landscape passed in muted colors. I should have been there earlier, he whispered. Michael shook his head. Don't start that again. Walter didn't respond, but the guilt stayed. A few miles late, Michael's phone buzzed again. He checked it. His jaw tightened. It's worse than she said. Walter turned slightly. What do you mean? Michael's voice dropped. He's refusing food completely now. Silence filled the truck. Walter's hands clenched together. Why would a child do that? Michael didn't answer right away. Then quietly, because something changed. That sentence lingered. Walter stared forward. You think it's me? Michael didn't respond immediately, which was answer enough. The truck slowed as they entered a residential area. Small houses, quiet streets, normal life happening everywhere except inside their vehicle. Walter shifted uncomfortably. I don't want to scare him. Michael glanced at him. You won't. A pause. You're not the scary part. That hit Walter harder than expected. They pulled up in front of a modest house. Lights were on inside. A woman's voice could be heard faintly through an open window. Michael parked. For a moment, neither of them moved. Walter stared at the house. This is where he lives. Michael nodded. Walter swallowed. 8 years, he whispered. Michael looked at him. Don't think about that right now. Walter nodded slowly, but it was impossible not to, because behind that door was a boy he had never met, a grandson he had never held, and a second chance he never thought would come. Michael opened the door. Ready? Walter hesitated, then quietly answered, no. A pause. But I'm going anyway. They stepped out together, and for Walter, every step toward that front door felt like walking into a life he had already missed, but was somehow still being invited to join. Michael brings Walter to meet his grandson, Ben, for the first time after years of absence. At Adam's house, Walter nervously walks down the hallway, unsure how to face the boy he never knew. When he enters Ben's room, the teenager is distant, hurt, and confused. Walter introduces himself as Ben's grandfather and admits he should have been there long ago. Ben reveals that his mother told him Walter never cared, while Walter confesses he wrongly believed he wasn't needed. Their conversation is painful but honest, exposing years of misunderstanding, regret, and emotional distance. When Ben notices Walter's illness and asks if he is dying, Walter answers truthfully that he does not know, but is trying to live. Ben admits he stopped eating because nothing feels normal anymore. Unable to erase the past, Walter simply promises his presence. Ben's quiet okay is not forgiveness, but the first small step toward it. The chapter ends with 3 generations: Walter, Michael, and Ben standing together, beginning the difficult journey of rebuilding a broken family and creating a future shaped by honesty, connection, and hope. The word okay didn't fix anything, but it changed the air in the room. Ben stayed sitting on the edge of the bed, still staring at the floor. Walter remained kneeling. Michael stood behind them both, unsure whether to step in or stay back. Silence stretched again, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was processing. Slow, unsteady, human. Walter finally spoke again. Can I ask you something? Ben hesitated, then nodded slightly. Walter chose his words carefully. Do you like school? Ben shrugged. Sometimes. A pause. Not lately. Walter nodded. Fair. Another silence. Then softer. What do you like? Ben looked up briefly. Drawing. That surprised Walter. A faint smile crossed his face. What do you draw? Ben hesitated again. Then quietly, places I've never been. That sentence landed deeply. Michael looked down for a second. Walter nodded slowly. I used to do that too. Ben glanced at him. You did? Walter nodded. When I was in the army. A pause. I used to draw houses I wanted to come back to. Ben studied him. Did you go back? Walter's expression tightened slightly. Yes. Another pause. But not the way I imagined. Silence returned, but Ben didn't look away this time. That was something. Michael stepped closer to the bed. Ben, you need to eat something. The boy shook his head immediately. I'm not hungry. Walter watched him carefully, then asked gently, is it because you're sad? Ben didn't answer, but his eyes lowered, and that was answer enough. Walter nodded slowly. I understand that. Ben finally looked at him. You do? Walter exhaled. Yes. A pause. Sometimes when everything changes, your body forgets what normal feels like. Ben listened. Quietly, Walter continued. But not eating doesn't make the pain smaller. Silence again. Then Ben whispered, it makes it quieter. That truth hit harder than expected. Michael looked away. Walter swallowed, then gently said, I know. A pause. But quiet pain still hurts you. Ben didn't respond, but he slowly reached for the plate. Not eating yet, just touching it. That small movement alone felt like progress. Michael noticed. So did Walter. Neither spoke. They didn't want to break it. After a moment, Ben looked up at Walter again. Are you staying? Walter hesitated, then glanced at Michael. Michael nodded once. Walter turned back to Ben. Yes, he said softly. As long as I can. Ben studied him, then nodded faintly. Okay, again. Not fixed, but steadier this time. Outside the room, life continued as usual, but inside it, something fragile had begun to rebuild. Slowly, carefully, one honest word at a time. Evening light faded beyond the window as the room settled into a slower rhythm. Ben had eaten a little more, not much, but enough that Michael noticed every bite as if it mattered more than anything else. Walter remained beside the bed, looking drained in a way that went beyond exhaustion. Ben leaned back against his pillow. Are you staying tonight? Yes, Michael replied. Ben looked at Walter. What about him? I can stay somewhere nearby, Walter said. Why not here? The question caught both men off guard. Space? Money? Health? Fear. Too many reasons crowded the silence. Before either could answer, Ben added, I don't mind. Michael exchanged a glance with Walter, then sighed. He can stay. For tonight. Walter nodded gratefully. A few minutes later, Ben asked, did you ever miss him? Walter answered immediately. Every day, especially when I wasn't here. Ben turned to Michael. Did you miss him too? Michael swallowed. I didn't know I was supposed to. The words settled heavily between them. Soon Ben's eyelids drooped. Michael adjusted his blanket while Walter watched quietly. For him, the sight felt almost unreal, a grandson resting peacefully. A son nearby. No anger, no shouting. Don't leave again, Ben murmured. I'm here, Walter said softly. I'm here too, Michael added. Ben drifted to sleep, looking like a child finally free of a burden too heavy to carry. The two men stepped into the dim hallway. He's strong, Walter said. Yeah, but tired. Walter lowered his eyes. So was I. Michael glanced at him. And look where that got you. After a pause, Walter replied. Maybe that's why we're here now. Neither spoke again, standing side by side, listening to Ben's steady breathing. They felt something neither had trusted in years. The future no longer seemed broken. It felt like something that might still be rebuilt, if they were careful not to lose each other again. The house was completely quiet now, not the heavy kind of silence from before, a softer one, the kind that comes after a storm finally stops fighting the ground. Michael stood near the hallway window, looking out into the night. Walter remained a few steps behind him. Neither of them spoke at first. There was nothing left that needed to be forced into words. After a while, Walter finally broke the silence. I keep thinking about that hospital. Michael didn't turn. He just listened. Walter continued, voice low. About Ben. A pause. If I had known, I would have come. Michael nodded slowly. I know. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Michael said, I used to think you chose not to care. Walter exhaled deeply. I know. Michael finally turned to face him. His eyes weren't angry anymore, just tired. And now, Walter looked back at him. Honest. Now I know I was wrong. And you were wrong. And something in the middle of all that destroyed 8 years of us. Michael looked down for a moment, then nodded once. Yeah. A pause. But we're here now. Walter gave a faint, fragile smile. We are. From the bedroom, a small sound came. Ben shifting in his sleep. Both men turned instinctively toward the door. Michael stepped forward slightly. I'll check on him. Walter nodded. But then, he added softly, can I? Michael hesitated, then stepped aside. Yeah. Walter walked slowly down the hallway, each step careful, not because of weakness, because of meaning. He stopped at the doorway. Ben was asleep, one arm resting near the edge of the blanket. His face relaxed in a way Walter hadn't seen all day. Walter didn't enter fully, just stood there, watching, a grandfather looking at a life he had missed, and somehow still been given a chance to touch. Michael joined him quietly. They stood together in the doorway, no distance between them now, except time. Walter spoke barely above a whisper. He doesn't need perfection. Michael nodded. I know. A pause. He just needs us here. Walter swallowed. I can do that. Michael glanced at him. Then stay. Walter looked at his son, then at his grandson, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't think about leaving. He simply said, I will. Inside the room, Ben slept peacefully. Outside, 2 generations stood guard over a future that wasn't promised, but was finally possible. And as the night settled fully over the house, what remained wasn't the past that broke them, but the quiet beginning of a family learning, step by step, how to exist again. Not healed, not perfect, but together.